Well, the slow progress being made on South Africa's major infrastructure developments is causing frustration in the private sector. Kaskavadia, Managing Director of the Banking Association of South Africa, joining me to discuss funding of infrastructure in South Africa and beyond our borders. Thanks for joining us today, Cas.
Pleasure.
We know the government has established the Presidential Infrastructure Coordinating Committee. Treasury has set up a task team to look into communication with the private sector, communication with public enterprises to look at how to bring on board more private investors. I mean, your thoughts on these type of initiatives, do you see them being effective right now, or are they still in kind of the information gathering and sharing phase?
Look, I think we have to welcome any efforts to coordinate the various stakeholders in the infrastructure program, but such coordination must lead to projects being now put on the table and more projects coming through the pipeline. We, part of the Treasury-led task team that's been formed to unblock blockages. But the problem is that we're not identifying the blockages. And our view is that the best way to do that is to actually get down and get our hands dirty. Let's identify a couple of projects. Let's put project finance and project management people around those projects, both from the public and private sector. Task them with structuring them to bring them to market. And as they're doing that, if we identify blockages, let's deal with them. I think we need to move beyond the rhetoric. All our banks tell us they don't have problems with policy issues. What they do have problems with coordination. They have problems in that the projects aren't coming through the pipeline, and we need to get those projects on the table.
And because this has an implication for banks who, of course, are working with construction companies, because many are saying that to a degree, the banks have ultimately been part of keeping construction companies afloat, in some cases perhaps just helping them abide by a period where we see this infrastructure project delay. Has that been the case?
Well, yeah, but both banks and construction companies have now developed a footprint outside of South Africa on the rest of the continent. And construction companies and banks are working quite extensively on the rest of the continent. Banks are certainly financing infrastructure. Their construction companies are.
So where the business isn't happening here, they've had to look.
Absolutely, have had to look outside of South Africa on the continent, and the continent seems to be. Rest of the continent seems to be open for business, and as we should be. So we certainly working quite hard. We certainly working under Business Leadership South Africa. Together with other players in the industry, and we're talking.
If I could just interrupt you, the market in South Africa is just closing up by 0.8%. Sorry, back to what you were saying, Dave.
So we're very keen on working with the relevant stakeholders to get this thing going, to get projects on the table, start working on those projects and getting the infrastructure program going, because that's a critical element. One, to improve lives, to send out the message that we're open for business, and to actually create jobs.
What I find amazing is we had this Renewable Energy Independent Power program, which has been lauded as a great success story in South Africa in terms of execution. You followed it back in 2009. You know, the kind of the structure of paying out of essentially the structure of these agreements changed. But the Treasury came together, the private sector came together, Eskom even came to the party. We've managed to have 47 projects approved and those to be completed by 2016. How can we get that so right in that specific space in a very new sector and not get simple roadworks, simple other infrastructure projects working?
Yeah, and all our members are actually citing the renewable energy project as the model that we should be actually applying. And I think the trick there was, one, we are absolutely clear that Treasury needs to be involved from the beginning, because ultimately they control the purse strings. They bring a discipline into the process. I think that funders need to be brought into the process early on in the game. There needs to be transparency throughout the process. And a critical aspect is that decisions need to be taken and kept to. These are long-term projects. These are projects that have significant outlay of funds. And we need certainty of decision making. We need certainty on the part of government that they will stay the route throughout the course of the project. And I think we can get it done, but we just seem to be, again, just involved in discussing the issues, talking about these issues, instead of actually saying, let's get a few projects on the ground. We'll learn by mistakes we make, but at least we'll be moving forward in this thing.
Now, another issue to look at going forward is Basel III and the change in funding requirements, because essentially there you've got banks that have to have enough cash on hand to meet their cash requirements for 30 days at a time. So when you're looking at that issue there, does that affect banks' ability to put money into long-term infrastructure projects? I mean, how does the funding mix have to respond to that, or what role then do other investors play in this game?
Look, it does have an impact, but we in constant discussion with our regulator to see how we phase in Basel III so as to minimize the economic impact of Basel III. But you know, in our discussions with government, in our discussions with longer-term institutional funders, there's sort of an understanding that banks would take up the first 7 or 8 years of funding during construction phase, and then the institutional funders come in. Because
is there appetite from the institutional space?
There is appetite. The National Treasury-led task team met each of the major institutional funders, met each of the major banks involved, and all of them individually said that there is appetite for funding. So long as the projects are put on the table, they are properly structured, there is appetite for funding, without a doubt. And that's being demonstrated by the fact that they actually funding in other parts of the continent.